The ground trembled as the two great forces of aura clashed with each other, but despite the chaos, Lin Yan still managed to think about how Ning Xianwu was in trouble and commanded the Xuanwu sect to go and protect him. On the other hand, Zhu Yun commanded the Qingshan sect to take advantage of the situation to kill the Xuanwu sect and send them back to their lair, to which Lan Zhu responded affirmatively. As the Xuanwu sect started to run away and the Qingshan sect chased behind them, Lu Qingshan stopped the Qingshan sect and told them not to chase the Xuanwu, which surprised Lan Zhu, and she told him that it was a good chance to destroy the Xuanwu sect. Lu Qingshan then told Lan Zhu to look at the red flag above them and told her that Yifeng just stood there and watched silently, so he was afraid that if they continued fighting, he would be displeased. Raising the kitchen knife, Lu Qingshan said that Yifeng, who didn't care about fame and fortune, had lent him the artifact, so in his inference, Yifeng didn't want the destruction of either side. Lan Zhu's eyes widened in surprise when she realized what Lu Qingshan was trying to say, that what Yifeng wanted was balance. To which, with a serious face looking ahead, Lu Qingshan added that Yifeng wanted them to check and keep balance between the two sides in order to protect the peace of the people of Jiangping. The light of the path shone on earth. The Qingshan sect twinkled and was enlightened as Lu Qingshan said that with such a mind and heart, Yifeng was very worthy to be upheld and respected for the rest of their lives because, compared to him, they were just creatures as small as ants. Meanwhile, Yifeng looked at the fight below with a dissatisfied look on his face. The people of Jiangping realized that the fight was over, so they all started to disperse, going back to their regular lives as they each had something to do. Yifeng tried to stop them and tell them there was still more, an amazing fight between Godzilla and King Kong. But the people did not listen to Yifeng, leaving him alone with his binoculars scattered on the ground. He complained about how the guys down there couldn't last a little longer, and he wondered how he was supposed to do business if they didn't fight. A few moments later, Yifeng passed through the woods as he went down the mountain when someone suddenly called out to him and asked him why he was there. It was a girl in a cloak, and Yifeng recognized her as Peng Ying. His face lit up, and he quickly approached Peng Ying, tapped her on the shoulder, and asked her what was up. He puckered his lips as he asked her if she was there to meet her childhood sweetheart. Peng Ying said nothing as she looked at Yifeng with a blank expression on her face, and her expression turned dark as she removed her cloak. Slapping his hands off her shoulder, Peng Ying told Yifeng that he had misunderstood, as she was just there by the order of his master to find a man of high repute. Yifeng was surprised when he heard Peng Ying talking about a master. Yifeng looked up at Peng Ying with surprise written all over his face, while Peng Ying looked the other way. She told him that he had been a good person and that she knew what he meant, and then apologized. With a cold stare, Peng Ying glanced at Yifeng and told him that she had joined the Qingshan sect with the help of the senior, and she reminded him that he knew that it had been absolutely impossible for her to join the Qingshan sect with her qualifications. The atmosphere turned gloomy as she continued to say that it had always been her dream to be able to enter the Qingshan gate and learn martial arts practices, so she promised that senior that she would never interact with other men in the future. Yifeng was petrified when he heard what Peng Ying had just said. Longing filled Yifeng's eyes as Peng Ying walked away and said goodbye, saying that they should not meet again in the future. A few moments later, Peng Ying approached Yu Wuji, who asked her if she had someone up there, to which she replied that there had been only one mortal. Yu Wuji clicked his tongue and crossed his arms as he told Peng Ying that he had asked her to find the expert, but she had ended up playing with other guys around. He reminded her about the promise that she had made to him, which made Peng Ying panic and ask for him to let her explain. Peng Ying grabbed Yu Wuji's hands and told him that Yifeng was just a cheap martial arts hall owner. She wrapped her arms around Yu Wuji's arm and told him that Yifeng could only daydream all day and write some shit and unreasonable martial arts secrets, so Yifeng could never be better than him. She added that if it hadn't been for a coincidence, she wouldn't have bothered to care about Yifeng. Peng Ying squeezed Yu Wuji's arms, closed her eyes, and blushed as she consoled him and told him not to be angry as he was the only one in her heart. Unbeknownst to Peng Ying, Yu Wuji looked down on her with an evil grin, and in his thoughts, he called her a stupid woman. He thought that her looking for someone was incompetent because if it hadn't been for her looks, even ghosts wouldn't have bothered to care about her. Yu Wuji then clenched his hands so hard that veins started popping out on them, and in his mind, he couldn't accept that Ning Xianwu, who had slaughtered the entire sword family, had single-handedly lost, and he blamed the unknown expert for getting in the way. Yu Wuji started sweating so much, and his expressions turned dark as he thought about how he had to do something quickly. Otherwise, when Ning Xianwu recovered from his injury, he would definitely be angry with him. Peng Ying noticed his demeanor, and she got worried and asked him if he was okay. A sudden realization hit Yu Wuji when the words martial arts hall and books hit him. He remembered that Lan Zhu had bought a martial art book from a certain martial arts hall in Jiangping that had helped Lu Qingshan break through. Yu Wuji cupped Peng Ying's face in between the palms of his hands and confirmed with her that she had said that the guy from earlier owned a martial arts hall, and that his usual hobby was writing books, which she confirmed but said that he was just a mortal. Yu Wuji leaped away from Peng Ying while laughing and said that it had been wonderful. With an evil look in his eyes, he thought that if Yifeng had been really an expert, he would have just needed to sit back and watch the Xuanwu sect fight with him, and he would have justified that. On the contrary, it would have been just right to use Yifeng as the object of the Xuanwu sect to vent out their anger. Rain poured down and hit the land as Yu Wuji said that after all, Yifeng had been a mortal, so he shouldn't have blamed him for being cruel, using him as his scapegoat, as it had been his fate and he had deserved it. He laughed maniacally and claimed that heaven had turned out to be helping him too. At the Xuanwu sect, someone yelled that they were so pissed off. It was Ning Xianwu, who had had his arms cut off and bandaged, and veins had popped out all over his body as he yelled at Yu Wuji, who hadn't found anything yet but had brought himself to their door. Yu Wuji knelt down in front of Ning Xianwu, and with Lin Yan by his side, he trembled and kept on asking for forgiveness, saying that he had already found out that Lan Zhu and Lu Qingshan had gotten the knife from an expert in Jiangping City. He went on all fours and bowed his head as he added that the person owned a martial arts gym in Jiangping City, which startled Ning Xianwu and Lin Yan. Yu Wuji continued to tremble and sweat profusely as he continued to tell Ning Xianwu that although other information had not been found yet, as long as Ning Xianwu looked for it, he would definitely find it. Ning Xianwu gritted his teeth and furrowed his brows, looking extremely mad, and said that what Yu Wuji said was bullshit because if there were any high-level martial art experts living in Jiangping City, it was impossible that he hadn't known them yet. He then said that he wanted to see which martial expert was helping Lu Qingshan. Lin Yan then interjected and told Ning Xianwu that she was willing to investigate the matter, but Ning Xianwu refused her offer and said that they had other plans. Ning Xianwu then said that he had already chosen someone for the matter, and then he called for Wu Chen, who immediately landed on the roof of the room they were in. Glancing behind him, Ning Xianwu told Wu Chen that although there were usually restrictions on him, this was the time when he was needed, and Ning Xianwu confirmed if Wu Chen knew what to do. Wu Chen grinned and confidently said that Ning Xianwu should leave the matter to him. A few moments had passed, and everything was peaceful back at Yifeng Martial Art Gym. A smell was coming out of the room, and Zhang King came in with a worried look on his face, as he thought that Yifeng hadn't been out of his room for 3 days, so it seemed that Peng Ying had really hurt him. When he entered the room, Zhang King was taken aback as it was extremely chaotic. Crumpled papers were scattered on the floor, and Yifeng sat down at the end of the room while something smoked in front of him. Worry filled Zhang King's eyes even more, as he hadn't seen Yifeng in a few days and the room was already in such a mess, so it seemed that Yifeng was really sad, and it was unbearable to be so infatuated to end up like that. Zhang King approached Yifeng and told him that he might be able to help, while in his mind he was telling Yifeng not to worry as he was there and he would never let him fall like that. But to his surprise, Yifeng did not look like he was hurting at all. He wrote with his left hand and fanned a barbecue with his right, and as he turned to look at Zhang King, he was surprised that Zhang King wanted to help because he was going to give him barbecue but he wanted to work. But then realization hit Zhang King. Yifeng was acting nonchalantly and whistling when he noticed that Zhang King was looking at him with eyes filled with worry. Zhang King furrowed his brow as he emotionally looked at Yifeng and thought that Yifeng must have been too sad but didn't want to show it to him. And it was a pity that he was a boy, and he couldn't help Yifeng. Zhang King asked Yifeng about his love, and to his surprise, Yifeng, while eating some barbecue, told him that Peng Ying had just been his childhood sweetheart. Yifeng's face was filled with enlightenment as he said that women would only affect the speed at which he made money, and the speed at which he could barbecue. Zhang King's eyes widened, and he was speechless. Yifeng then told Zhang King to go and sell the books because he wanted to change the carriage next month, so it was all up to him. As Yifeng asked Zhang King what he was waiting for and told him to go and work hard. Before he could react, Zhang King was already on the streets, petrified. When he came to his senses, he noticed something. Zhang King looked at the kind of books he was holding, and by looking at them and reading the titles of the books, stories of men from 3 countries, the story of a group of women and a man, the story of 3 women and 105 men, the story of 4 monsters and a man, he found them so strange. As he wondered if those books could really be sold, he tripped at the curb, making the books fly in the air. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Jiangping City, someone called out for help. It was a man with an already disfigured head, and Wu Chen held it. He called him an idiot and said that even if the King of Heaven came, he would be able to save him. And the man screamed from the top of his lungs as Wu Chen pulled out his spirit from him, leaving only his bones like the pile behind him. Wu Chen flicked his arms and threw the man, adding him to the pile of dried out corpses behind him, and said that if only the taste of that man was good, he could fill his stomach, and he really hoped that the guy who ran the martial arts gym could satisfy him. Suddenly, someone confronted Wu Chen, saying that young people had to be forgiving and advised him not to go to Jiangping City anymore. It was an old man who was lecturing him and telling him that he was on his way to Jiangping City to pay a visit to an old acquaintance, so he was not allowed to mess around. Veins popped out of Wu Chen's face, and he was annoyed as he asked the old man if he was kidding. But as Wu Chen was about to tell the old man to shut his mouth, he was cut off when that old man attacked him by summoning a huge palm to smash him into the ground and telling him to die. As the palm was about to hit Wu Chen, his face contorted in fear, and he was surprised that the old man was a realm above the martial king. The gigantic palm hit the ground with such a huge impact. Dust blew out everywhere, and while the old man's attack left a huge dent on the ground in front of him, he was surprised to see that Wu Chen was not there, and he wondered how a martial artist cultivating evil spirits could escape from his blow earlier. A sudden realization hit the old man. He recalled that Wu Chen had pulled out something earlier just as he was about to get hit by his attack, and he just recognized it as the sacred stone. He thought that if the treasure of the emperor had fallen into the hands of such an evil cultivator, then he was afraid that a small city like Jiangping was probably going to suffer. On the other hand, at Jiangping City, Wu Chen was hiding, and he thought that it had been fortunate that he had had the treasure with him. Otherwise, he would have died earlier. Looking at Yifeng's martial arts gym, Wu Chen said that he had killed all the people in the other martial arts gym, so it had been the last one. With a sinister look on his face, Wu Chen laughed and said that it had not been a problem for him at all. And as he wondered if the shitty martial art gym in front of him had been the home of the unknown expert he had been looking for, he incited the expert to show him what he had been capable of. The sacred stone was an evil object used by the founding ancestor of the Xuanwu sect when he killed the immortals, and even in the face of attacks from the higher realms, it could turn the odds in favor of the holder. Lin Yan looked displeased as she asked Ning Xianwu why he didn't send her, and Ning Xianwu told her that Wu Chen had his sacred stone in his hands, so even if there was an accident, the sacred stone could protect him from any worries, so they just needed to wait for Wu Chen to bring good news. Wu Chen arrived in front of Yifeng's martial arts gym, and he laughed as he let out a blue aura at the tip of his fingers and said that the martial arts gym did not even have a name, so he assumed that it was totally garbage. He flicked his finger and threw the aura towards the signboard at the martial arts gym's entrance. Wu Chen literally stepped over the threshold without another glance because of a broken plaque and confidently started to plan out where he would start destroying next. But unbeknownst to him, what he did triggered something, and he was taken aback when the signboard he had just attacked burst into flames and emitted a golden aura. Suddenly, multiple kinds of weapons formed out of the fire, and were all pointed towards Wu Chen. He cursed at the pressure that was trying to kill him, but he confidently brought out the sacred stone and thought that he was fortunate that he could do everything with it. But to Wu Chen's surprise, the attack hit him directly, creating holes in his body, and all he could do was scream in pain. He could not understand what was happening as his face started to contort and dissolve into nothingness. Wu Chen disappeared without leaving a trace of his body, and all that was left was the sacred stone that fell to the ground. Silence filled the entrance of Yifeng's martial arts gym as the dust that had been stirred up by the attack started to settle down and dissipate. A few moments later, Yifeng arrived at the martial arts gym, followed by Zhang King, who had a bump on his head. Yifeng immediately noticed the sacred stone, picked it up, wondered who had dropped the stone, and said that it was really beautiful. Yifeng raised his brows and smiled as an idea came to him. He then placed the sacred stone at the broken part of the curb, using it to mend the spot, and Zhang King was so surprised that the size was just right. A few moments later, two people played Xianqi, and one of them obviously overpowered the other as one of the hands trembled and hesitated to make the next move. It was the old man from earlier, and he told his opponent, Yifeng, that when he first started, he thought that he was on the same level as him. But when he observed closely, he couldn't see through him. Looking bored, Yifeng told him that it was not surprising that he couldn't see through him because he was the one who taught him chess, while in his thoughts, he wondered how the old man was there to see him again. The old man sweated and thought that he had come there to play many times, but he still couldn't see Yifeng's true cultivation. He opened his eyes and looked at Yifeng with suspicion in his eyes, as he thought that there were so many secret techniques on the Xianzhong continent. But Yifeng cultivated a technique that made others unable to see through his cultivation, and he did not exaggerate it in the slightest. As Yifeng looked at him with a serious face, he thought that if there were such a person, it would have been impossible to be an unknown person in the cultivation world. The old man was lost deep in his thoughts as he continued to think and wonder if Yifeng was really better than him. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he was surprised when Yifeng told him that it was his turn and he was on checkmate. He questioned when he got checkmated because he did not notice. Suddenly, something caught the old man's attention. He had stepped on the curb, and he was surprised when he saw the sacred stone that was used to mend the broken spot. He then wondered if Wu Chen had been executed on the spot by Yifeng. As Yifeng politely bowed down to him and thanked him for letting him win, the old man thought about the meaning behind Yifeng using such a valued treasure to block the threshold, and he figured that Yifeng was trying to convey the message that he could pull the sacred stone at will, and was challenging him to see what he could do. The old man analyzed that based on Yifeng's cultivation, he should have known the value of the sacred stone, but he was still trapped on the treasure like that. He thought that whether it was scheming or a chess game, Yifeng was a bit more powerful than he had thought, and with all the hints Yifeng had made, he realized that it was a different level of competition. As the old man realized how Yifeng could have been so confident, he smiled confidently as he thought that Yifeng seemed to have underestimated him. He then called out to Yifeng to help him look at something, and then he suddenly pulled out his sacred weapon, acting like it was an accident, and asked Yifeng to scratch his back with it as it had been itchy. As the rake sparkled, Yifeng looked at it with awe, and something seemed to have hit him. The old man held his head up and looked proud as he saw Yifeng's reaction, and he thought about how he hadn't just exhausted his possessions. He had even lost half of his life in order to obtain the treasure, the seven-tooth holy rake. But the old man was surprised, and he got mad when Yifeng approached him, rubbed the rake's pole, and with tears in his eyes, told him to throw it away as it had been rusty and said that it must have been very inconvenient to do farm work. With tears forming at the corner of his eyes, Yifeng said that he should have discovered that the old man had been looking for him to play chess again and deliberately lost to him so he could help him repair his farm tools, which extremely surprised the old man. As the old man thought about how Yifeng had actually insulted the artifact that he had been so proud of, Yifeng took the seven-tooth holy rake out of his hands and told him not to be excited. Yifeng looked at the old man with pity as he thought about how farming was not easy and, in the end, it had been the only thing to make a living for a farmer, so it was not strange to be anxious when something went wrong with the rake. As Yifeng entered his home and told the old man to just wait a moment for him, the old man gritted his teeth, and he was fuming mad. He thought that since Yifeng looked down on his seven-tooth holy rake so much, then he wanted to see what else he could come up with that could be compared to his seven-tooth holy rake. At Yifeng's martial arts gym forging house, as Yifeng was about to forge the seven-tooth holy rake, Zhang King called out to him and told him that the grandfather who had borrowed the kitchen knife earlier, Lu Qingshan, wanted to see him, and Yifeng then referred to him as the cook at Qingshan farmhouse. Zhang King told Yifeng that Lu Qingshan had said they had come to pay their respects, which confused Yifeng. But then he instructed Zhang King to let them in first, and he would come as soon as he had finished forging the farm tools. Lu Qingshan came with Zhu Yun, who asked him if there had really been anyone living in that shabby place, and Lu Qingshan quickly shut her up and told her to put away her little temper in front of Yifeng. Lu Qingshan reminded her about the power of the knife and told her that if Yifeng got unhappy, the consequences would be disastrous. But Zhu Yun thought that Lu Qingshan was exaggerating. As Zhu Yun took a step forward, she stepped on the sacred stone, and sweat ran down her face as she was both confused and surprised at what she had just felt. She jumped out in surprise when she realized that she had been stepping on a sacred stone. She knew that it had been the treasure of the Xuanwu sect founder, and she looked at it anxiously and thought about how it had been used to mend the threshold. She was crouching on the ground, inspecting the sacred stone further, when she realized that Lu Qingshan had already walked ahead of her, and she immediately called out to him, asking him to wait for her. Zhu Yun came running towards Lu Qingshan and told him that she suspected that there was something wrong with the origin of Yifeng, so she suggested that they leave, but Lu Qingshan cut her off, said that she was talking nonsense, and told her to keep her eyes open and see clearly. With the clanging sound in the background, Zhu Yun asked Lu Qingshan what he was looking at so she could get a good look. An image of golden dragons was forming in the sky, and they were coming from the seven-tooth holy rake while Yifeng forged it. Seeing the scene in front of him, Lu Qingshan trembled, and he repeatedly told Zhu Yun that it was a small scene and not to panic. But Zhu Yun pointed out that he was obviously the most flustered of the two of them. Zhu Yun bit her lower lip. She could not believe that she was looking at the seven-tooth holy rake, and she thought that she had been blinded. She could not accept that it was real because, according to legend, the magic weapon had been used by the Nine Heavens' profound goddess to eradicate the demons in Shengjing. Zhu Yun looked apprehensive as she called Lu Qingshan, who had been looking apprehensive as well, and confirmed with him that it was not fake, it was the seven-tooth holy rake. They noticed the old man from earlier and saw that he exuded the same martial intent as the rake, so they deduced that the rake must have been his. And Lu Qingshan said that people who could use sacred weapons since ancient times had been at least above the realm of martial emperor. The old man sat there, exuding an intense, fiery golden aura that shrouded him. As they looked at the old man, both Zhu Yun and Lu Qingshan thought that he looked a bit like the madman who had slaughtered the 6 towns of Xianjiang. But that madman had been missing for 30 years, so they didn't think that it was such a coincidence. The old man noticed the two of them, and with a fierce look in his eyes and a cup of drink in his hand, he called out to them. Zhu Yun and Lu Qingshan immediately shriveled, and they were both sweating profusely. The old man's aura quickly changed into a friendly one, and he asked the two of them if they had been there to find Yifeng, and he invited them to come and have a cup of tea. Lu Qingshan awkwardly scratched the back of his head and agreed to the old man's invitation, which extremely surprised Zhu Yun. Zhu Yun looked scared, and she told Lu Qingshan that they should just hand over the knife and gift to Yifeng and leave. But Lu Qingshan glanced at her and told her that he was afraid that it was too late. The golden dragons came out of the fogging house, and upon seeing them, Lu Qingshan told Zhu Yun that it was not the right time. Yifeng raised his hammer into the air and hit the seven-tooth holy rake with all his might. And with that final strike, Yifeng sighed and wiped the sweat off his head as he declared that it was finally finished. The seven-tooth holy rake looked shiny and brand new, and Yifeng was pleased with the result and felt really good. Lu Qingshan was astonished, and he could not believe that Yifeng had actually restored a semi-holy weapon into a true holy weapon. Zhu Yun was also surprised, and she wondered how Yifeng had been able to do that and added that with a holy weapon, one could dominate the world. As Zhu Yun was about to ask just who Yifeng was, panic struck her when she saw Yifeng walking straight towards them with huge strides and an ominous aura, and she asked Lu Qingshan what they should do. Lu Qingshan told her not to panic and look at the old man, who just sat there calmly as Yifeng ran towards him with the shiny seven-tooth holy rake. Both of them thought that the old man had just seen such a spectacular scene, but his heart had been as still as water. But unbeknownst to them, the old man had been shaking and cursing in his mind when he had seen that Yifeng had actually forged his broken holy weapon directly into a true holy weapon, and that had been the moment he had realized how ridiculous the previous competitive comparison had been. The old man stood up to receive the holy weapon, but he had been taken aback when Yifeng had told him that it was not for free, but that he would give him a 50% discount. The old man's mind had been in chains because he had thought that even if Yifeng had given him a discount on the holy weapon, he couldn't have afforded it because he had already spent his entire fortune just to obtain the slightly damaged seven-tooth holy rake and had lost half of his life in exchange for it. So he had been afraid that he couldn't take the rake at the moment. With a bored look on his face, Yifeng had asked the old man what was wrong and if he didn't have enough money, while thinking what a poor thing the old man had been for not having a single gold coin. Yifeng suddenly told the old man that it was just a rake, so if he didn't have enough money, he would give it to him for free. And upon hearing what he had just said, the jaws of the 3 cultivators in front of him had dropped. The old man had jumped up and his heart had been struck when he had heard that Yifeng was giving the holy weapon to him for free. And instead of calling him brother, he had then called him Mr. Yi and had told him to accept his bow, which had extremely surprised Yifeng. As for him, he had only fixed the old man's farm tool, so he couldn't understand what was going on. The old man, Wu Yonghong, wailed and told Yifeng that his kindness was etched in his heart, and maybe he didn't need him for the rest of his life, but he swore on his life that if he had any use for him, he would gladly die. On the other hand, Zhu Yun and Lu Qingshan shivered and were surprised when they confirmed that Wu Yonghong really was one of the 4 madmen who had slaughtered the 6 towns of Xianjiang. It then started to rain. As the rain poured and lightning struck, Wu Yonghong raised his hand and vowed in the name of heaven and earth that if there was a violation, he would be destroyed. All the while, Yifeng stood behind him, looking extremely surprised, holding an umbrella, while Wu Yonghong raised the holy weapon in front of Zhu Yun and Lu Qingshan, who were both surprised. Yifeng watched them from the side and thought that Wu Yonghong, who was on his deathbed, doing something like that was really embarrassing to watch.